on Thursday, 28 October at 9 a.m. And first item on the agenda is roll call. So Denise, can you give us roll call, please?
Director Mueller.
Here.
Director Michelson.
Here.
Director Coverdale.
Here.
Vice President Feldman.
Here.
And we know President Reynolds is having technical difficulties. Hopefully he'll be with us soon.
Okay, welcome everybody. First item on the agenda is public comment. Do we have any people who wish to address us? Do we have to do the Pledge of Allegiance and all today?
I think we should.
Okay, so let me ask that we do that. Stand for the public Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America. And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen.
Sorry about that. Given that, I'll once again ask for public comment. Hearing none, we'll go to item 3, which is the board workshop, a strategic planning session for the review of local water source alternatives. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mary to begin the meeting.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to introduce Bob Schultz, Principal Hydrogeologist with GeoBlue Consulting, who will be leading the discussion today. Bob has over 26 years of experience serving as a technical consultant in environmental and water supply fields. Prior to founding GeoBlue, Bob served as a hydrogeologist at National and Global Engineering Consultancies and has also worked as a regulatory specialist for county land use and environmental health agencies. Bob has a master's degree in earth sciences from the University of California at Santa Cruz, where he wrote a thesis on the hydrology of coastal watersheds in Central California. So I'm also pleased to welcome Dave Dixon, our former general manager, and also Jim Teeter, who has served as our district engineer since the early 1960s. So after our board discussions in spring of 2021, staff engaged Bob Schultz to inventory and summarize the local water source alternatives while providing his perspectives given his hydrogeologist glasses. So we provided Bob with access to many, many studies, probably equivalent to a file cabinet full. It certainly took up his SharePoint site. And so these, and Bob has also looked at a lot of what's publicly available. So, and Bob, had the opportunity to chat with each of the board members for a few minutes. And also we had a session with Dave Dixon and Jim Teeter. So today's discussion will be fairly high level. And I will note, and it looks like Glenn is joining us. So he's coming on. But I will note that there are many considerations that we need to think about. But today's discussion will not be covering things like all the issues and all the hurdles that we have to we encounter with regulatory, CEQA, Fish and Wildlife,
Rogues list.
Coastal Commission, etc. So with that, and I guess we'll, Glenn, I was just giving an introduction.
Good morning.
And I'm glad you could connect.
Me too.
So I was just going to turn it over to Bob. I introduced him, but do you have anything to add or anything
Nope,
to say?
glad we're here.
Okay. So with that, I will turn this meeting over to Bob Schultz.
Excuse me, it looked like we had a public member trying to get on. I saw her face flash on a couple of times on the screen, Mr. Chair. So I don't know if we need to clear that out.
She signed in.
Michelle
Dr.
Dragon.
Muller, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So Bob,
Okay, good morning. Thank you for the introduction, Mary. Good morning, directors of the Coastside County Water District Board. As Mary said, my name is Robert Schultz. I'm a hydrogeologist, and I'm pleased to present to you and help facilitate this workshop. I am going to start sharing my screen so that I can put slides on your screens for you. When I do that, I will no longer be able to see your faces in the Zoom. So I can hear you loud and clear, but if you're waving your hand, and I will not respond because I can't see you. Okay. Hopefully now you can see my screen. If anyone cannot see the slides, please let me know.
Not yet.
Oh, shit.
Bob, if I will say, this is intended to be a workshop, and I think we really want this to be interactive. So please ask questions. So.
Understood. Yes, absolutely. So it's been my pleasure to review the many studies of the hydrogeology, hydrology, and geology available for the watersheds within the Coastside County Water District jurisdiction. The occurrence and availability of water has long been an important subject of study, as well as a passion to many in California. Here's the objective of this workshop written out for us on this slide. I'd like to highlight that my scope of work focused on compilation and review of information from historical studies. I did not find a need or a reason to conduct an original study of local hydrology in order for this workshop to be held. My final slides 46, 47, and 48, so there are many slides, present my conclusions and recommendations. And essentially they confirm the findings of previous reviewers. James Teeter on this call was a primary author of previous compilations, and he's not here on the Zoom with us. Here's a list of the sections of this slide presentation. As Mary indicated, I invite the board of directors to discuss individual slides, topics, or concepts. As we go through these presentation sections, I'll be happy to modify my presentation to facilitate discussion. The latter sections of my presentation, sections 6, 7, and 8, are just as important as the earlier sections, so I plan to move quickly if it becomes necessary to make sure we get through all of the slides. Here's my estimate if I were to present through without a discussion. Here's my estimate of what this might look like. I've got about 30 minutes of initial comment, followed by 20 minutes on surface water and surface water projects, 15 minutes on groundwater and groundwater projects, and then a final 10 minutes. Obviously, this is a workshop, and so the intent is for this to be a working session with lots of discussion. I'm putting out there what could be if that was what you would like. If you'd like to shift it around, feel free to let me know as we go through, or if you've got comments right up front, please let me know. Okay, so this section of my presentation covers the results of alternative studies conducted in 1981 and 2002. Other alternatives were performed in addition to these, but I found these to be comprehensive and at the appropriate scale for this workshop. I also, in this section, go over the multi-year groundwater study conducted by San Mateo County from 2002 through 2010. Let's see, some of the additional studies included a 1998 study by James Teeter and a white paper in 2019 by Director Reynolds. These two that I'm focusing on, the 1981 and 2002 alternatives analyses, were the most comprehensive and the best fit. Okay. So historical studies of source alternatives. This was EIP 1981 for Coastside County. In that study, connection to Crystal Springs was recommended in the 1981 study and was the selected alternative. The other alternatives reviewed are listed on this and the next two slides. In 1981, San Francisco did not transfer ownership of the reservoir or water rights to Coastside. The Deniston watershed, which is the second largest watershed within Coastside jurisdiction, was considered as a potential dam site at that time. Coastside County Water District determined that the cost of a dam on Denison would be too high given the amount of water that might be obtained. And Coastside gave up options to purchase additional land rights at Denison at around that time. An interesting concept was also explored in 1981, use of multiple smaller off-stream impoundments. And the high cost of multiple small ponds combined with the cumulative adverse environmental and agricultural effects eliminate this alternative. Similar to the many small ponds concept in 1981, Coastside looked at using a large number of hilltop tanks to store treated water. The concept there again is to store water from winter rains for use during the dry season. Construction and maintenance of dozens of water storage tanks was determined at the time of excess cumulative adverse impacts, pose water quality challenges, and be a high cost alternative. At that time, surface water diversion was considered as well. The key factor there is that surface water is only available during very limited time periods, i.e. during and immediately following large rainfall events. In 1981, groundwater was ruled out. However, in the 1981's conservative assumptions of poor water quality and impacts to creeks were subsequently found to be unnecessary or incorrect by work later reported in 2003 by Todd engineers. So we'll go over that in more detail in subsequent slides. I wanted to make sure that that was brought up as part of the 1981 alternatives analysis. 1981, the final three alternatives included the 1981 study of, in that study are desalination, water conservation, and wastewater reclamation or water recycling. Desalination was dismissed due to high costs. Conservation was recommended as it is today, and wastewater reclamation was dismissed due to water quality concerns. Technological improvements have made recycled water, even as a potential potable source, much more feasible. One of the primary challenges is confirmation of adequate water quality prior to use. Indirect potable reuse has been practiced for over 50 years in California, but regulations enabling direct potable reuse won't become final until the end of 2023. Okay, Okay, the next alternative study ratchets down or telescopes in a little bit. The 1981 alternative study was comprehensive, but also fairly high level in its approach, looking at concepts and fairly broadly defining projects. Groundwater, for example, in the 1981 study was reviewed as a media and not reviewed at the time on a project level. The 2002 study by James Teeter was also comprehensive, but it was also conducted at a project scale. Specific projects were conceptualized in the 2002 study and then reviewed from an engineering perspective. In the Pilarcitos watershed, Teeter looked at impounding surface water for subsequent use. He concluded that Pilarcitos Creek water can be captured using the existing well pumping system. So there'd be no benefit from an impound structure or diversion structure. Pilarcitos is by far the largest watershed, and we'll talk more about that later in the presentation. On smaller creeks, Teeter concluded there is insufficient flow relative to the cost of a dam for impoundments. This included Frenchman's, Arroyo Leon, Mills, or Purissima creeks. Teeter did not advance the off-stream impoundments, and a dam on Deniston Creek was considered infeasible, in part because the storage portion of the water rights permit on Deniston was abandoned in the 1980s. The Teeter study included obtaining additional supply from SFPUC reservoirs, but all water there in those reservoirs was already committed to San Francisco customers. This slide includes 4 projects that were recommended in Teeter's study. The first is the Deniston San Vicente project that continues to be pursued by Coastside. The second is direct diversion from Pilarcitos Creek in Half Moon Bay. This project has not been advanced. The third potentially feasible project from Teeter on this slide is the Deniston well field. This source provides local supply to Coastside. And the fourth is the Lower Pilarcitos well project. This project was recommended for further investigation. The Lower Pilarcitos wells project continues to be potentially feasible. However, the next step studies have yet to be conducted. Okay, my third introductory study, comprehensive study is a little bit of a switch away from alternatives analyses. This is the county, San Mateo County's study of Midcoast groundwater. In the small groundwater sub-basins comprising the Midcoast area, estimates for storage and current pumping were relatively low, i.e. storage in the low hundreds of acre feet and pumping in the tens of acre feet per year. The study by the county was performed, and it's with an ostensible objective of assessing if resources were being inappropriately or overused. This is a different objective from our objective. The county study found that there is sustainable use of groundwater along the Midcoast region. Continued again on the Midcoast study. Some of the key concepts I wanted to highlight this as we transition from the studies to looking at more specific hydrology and hydrogeology. Some key concepts. First, the source of all groundwater is rainfall. Kind of seems obvious, but it's really important as we go further in. Groundwater recharge primarily from stream flow. Again, this is, when you think about it, it becomes a little bit more obvious. But on the surface, we think rainfall landing on the hill slopes is infiltrating. Well, most of the rainfall actually runs off and into the streams. And it's through those streams and through the alluvial gravels that we see most of the recharge occurring. And this translates into where we find groundwater available. And when I say available, I mean, where is it recharged and replenished on a sustainable basis? The third point from the county study that I think is important to carry through is that monitoring was recommended relative to saltwater intrusion and due to uncertainty in surface water, groundwater separation. So continuing to set the tone, looking ahead toward future projects, I think it is appropriate for us to have in our minds a map of existing facilities. I recognize this is a little bit of an older map. I like this one because it's got lots of colors on it. And you can really see where the coastside facilities are located on this figure. We can see the Cedaw Canyon wells up in pink. We can see the Deniston wells to the north on the coast. And we can see the pipelines connecting those facilities to Half Moon Bay and to the water treatment plants and to the distribution lines. Surface water is diverted from the two largest watersheds, Cedaw and Deniston, and groundwater is pumped at Deniston, and water treatment plants are located near Cedaw and Deniston. Another picture to have in mind as we think of future projects is where does Coastside own properties? And Coastside owned properties they're not surprisingly located adjacent to the Coastside water facilities. The two inset boxes show the Deniston area and the lower Cedaw area. Here's a quick roll-up of strengths and weaknesses. It's my final slide before we move on to the next section of this presentation. A very high-level review, connection to SFPUC. Water provides most of the district's supply. There is surface water available within Coastside's jurisdiction. That's huge. And there's groundwater that is currently a water source for the district and for other pumpers. Weaknesses include limited local water storage, drought susceptibility, and relatively small groundwater basins. At this point, I'd like to take a quick pause and open up the floor for discussion. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see faces. Here we are. Don't all talk at once.
Go ahead, John. And John, you're still muted. John, you got to unmute.
Muted.
Okay, how's that?
There you go.
Yeah, that's better, John. We got you.
Okay, with the professional there, it's been my experience on the saltwater intrusion back in the history of the coastside when the oil fields were very popular as a young man in the 50s or a young kid hanging out with the oil guys. The saltwater intrusion, if I remember correctly, was about 12 to 1,600 feet down into the well. So I find it interesting, even with our local wells here, it's been our experience that saltwater intrusion would probably be over 90 feet or 100 feet, which is no more water table for us around here. But anyway, that's just a comment that I'm trying to remember because we don't have the sandy soil like the Salinas Valley. We got a lot of blue clay down there, and that keeps the salt water from coming in from my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. I think that's a really apropos. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen here. I'm going to go back to my saltwater intrusion slide. In the figure here, I'll talk just a little bit about this. There are lots of arrows. Let me explain the drawing a little bit. On the surface, it appears like it's a simple drawing, but there's actually quite a large amount of information that's folded in here. So we've got the land surface depicted up here. We've got the water table, that's the groundwater table. with a dashed purple line coming across. We've got the Pacific Ocean here, sky up above, blue sky, and like today, saltwater at depth beneath the ocean, and freshwater on the left-hand side. Freshwater is flowing from the land toward the ocean. We've got a saltwater wedge, and what this figure shows is that that wedge has a specific curvature and shape. And we see saltwater intruding much further underneath the land surface at depth than we do up near, up in the hundreds of feet. We've got a very limited, if no, saltwater intrusion. And at depth, we've got a significant amount of saltwater intrusion. As Director Mueller stated, the geology or hydrogeology, the hydrostratigraphy adjacent to the ocean is critical in understanding how, whoops, we moved to the wrong slide here. How far we are, how far and where saltwater might intrude as a result of a disruption of the natural flow of fresh water. If the natural flow of fresh water sufficiently continues, we don't see any movement despite pumping. If there is a sustainable amount of pumping, we might see a very limited amount of intrusion of saltwater, or maybe no intrusion in the areas of, in the hydrostratigraphic units of concern. I think that basically I'm saying the same thing that you are, John, that there's a lot of detail and science behind understanding exactly where our saltwater intrusion might be expected to occur and where monitoring should be performed.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question. I have a question for Bob. Given your expertise and oversight of this type of environment, how well would you say, how would you rank us from 0 to 10, given the studies in 81, 2000, 2008, 2010, in meeting the objectives to where we are today in terms of our implementation? How well have we done? And do you think we've taken account of all the information that was available back then to bring us to where we are today? So I'm just trying to get a sense. I think we've done pretty well, not having been associated with from 81, but more recently. And I just want your comments as to how well and professionally we did in meeting those proposals and advice and like that. Thank you.
Well, that's a good question. It's also a subjective question in that success is measured by whether or not you achieve your objectives, and so whether or not you achieved your objectives is not that's outside of my scope. I didn't review what the objectives were in the past. So on one level, I can't give you a direct answer, but I can give you an answer that Coastside is very unique in that it has a diversified water supply portfolio. There is imported water from SFPUC, considered one of the state's most reliable sources. There is local surface water that provides a significant amount of supply, and there's local groundwater. that's used, it provides a significant amount of supply. So from my perspective, the Coastside water portfolio that's developed over the years came from a very step-by-step and well-executed process of starting with large concepts and selecting alternatives within the bands that made the most sense, ratcheting down and going to the project scale and executing projects that were very carefully chosen and today function quite well. The Deniston well field for groundwater continues to provide a local source. The Denison Diversion provides a significant contribution to the annual water usage. And Cedaw, which is by far and away the largest watershed in the Coastside jurisdiction, is well used with the well field in the Cedaw Canyon. So from an overall perspective, it seems from a hydrogeologist's perspective, it seems like all of the right places have been incorporated into a well-diversified portfolio. I think that I will skip ahead a little bit and go to my slides 46, 47, 48. There is an opportunity within our largest watershed to look to groundwater as an additional water source. So I think that's where there may be some opportunity that has not yet been fully evaluated and exploited.
I appreciate your input. Thank you.
Any other questions for Bob before he moves on? So, okay.
Okay, I'm going to go back onto my screen share, so I won't be able to see you, but I can hear you. So looking ahead, we've got a framework of projects that have been reviewed in the past.
You're not sharing, Bob.
Oh, okay. There we go.
Okay.
Thank you. Now that we have a framework of projects that have been reviewed in the past and the district's overall water supply picture, let's look at the local hydrology. Rainfall is seasonal. It's kind of obvious to say, but it's a really important concept. Almost no rain late June through early September, and that's every year. That's very, very high likelihood that there will not be any rain in July or August. Average rainfall is 26 inches per year on the coast. This is a little bit less reliable. The rainfall totals may vary. So the average is specifically that, it's an average. Despite local rainfall, droughts are recurring, and a really important feature of local rainfall is that much more rain falls on the hills than does on the coast. So this slide shows the coastside watersheds and shows rainfall isohyads. The isohydal lines show us where more rain falls and where less rain falls. Kind of like a topographic map of rainfall. An important metric to keep in mind is that the average annual rainfall in the Cedaw watershed, for example, is 6 inches more than the average rainfall on the coast. And this increase in average is a result of so much of this watershed being located at higher elevations. So I won't read through the specific statistics. You can read those for yourselves. The watersheds are shown in color, and on the next slide, I'll provide a little bit more detail. Largest watershed, almost by an order of magnitude, is Cedaw. The next largest is Denison. Then there's Frenchman's. The remaining watersheds are significantly smaller and they decrease quickly in size. This slide also shows 2 sub-watersheds, Snuff Creek and Mills Creek, within the Cedaw watershed. Nuff is salmon colored and Miller is shown in gray. When I look at this figure and remember back to the slides of the Coastside facilities, I think about why there are not more facilities in the Cedaw Creek watershed. Deniston has an operating groundwater pumping system, and the county Midcoast study explains that groundwater is sustainably used in several small coastal basins north of Half Moon Bay. So let's go through a little bit, just a geography recap. The district jurisdiction is outlined in red. The pink watershed is Cedaw Creek. And as I said, there are 2 sub-watersheds, Mills Creek here and Nuff Creek here, that are within. I've highlighted those because they're large enough to, and of interest enough to highlight within this larger Cedaw Creek watershed. To the south, we've got Arroyo Cañada Verde. We've got Frenchman's here. We've got Roosevelt Creek, very small. The Deniston watershed is here in this kind of olive color. And to the north, we've got San Vicente, the long, narrow watersheds extending up into the upper reaches of the mountain range. You can see that the upper section of Cedaw Creek watershed is all within an area of very high rainfall. The isohydal lines here, this is the 900 millimeters per year. Up here at the very top, we've got 950 millimeters per year. When we come down to Half Moon Bay, we're between 700 millimeters per year and 750 millimeters per year. So quite a difference between the upper areas and the coastal areas. And the term that we use for that is orographic forcing.
I have a comment here, please, if I may.
Go ahead, John.
I'm looking at my history archives here, if I may quickly here. In 1951, Half Moon Bay had 26.49 inches of rain, and Skyline had 60 inches. So I'm just kind of giving you a little background. And in 52, we had 36, almost 37, and Skyline had almost 65 inches of rain. So these are my private little records here that I had from ancestors. But I love looking through them. Let me tell you, they're pretty cool. So anyway, and this was put together in 1956. Thank you for letting me make those comments about the difference in the coast and that wonderful Skyline ridge of ours.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Bob, this is Glenn Reynolds. Are you going to have a slide in the future showing the overlay of our groundwater wells and the potential for future groundwater wells, or should we talk about it now?
I have several slides that will suit that quite well. Not exactly what you've explained, but close enough.
Thank you.
Last slide on hydrology, this is my surface water section. I'm trying to understand rainfall and stream flow. These are the next key set of points that are listed out, four bullet points on your screens. I think this slide showcases the challenges of using surface water along our section of California coast. The example hydrograph, so this is a stream hydrograph. We're simply recording stage in a small tributary to Pillars Creek. It shows daily stage recording from fall of 1999 through summer of 2000 on Apinolio Creek. This was just arbitrarily selected. I liked this hydrograph because it's fairly representative, and it's also, at the same time, it's on a tributary, so it's fairly simple to understand. What it's showing us is that within a given year, there are a limited number of large rainfall events. Water from these rainfall events flows quickly through the creeks and into the ocean. And then it also shows us that when storms come back to back, water from the subsequent storms runs to the ocean even more quickly than water from the preceding storms. A final very important characteristic of the local streams is that perennial flow does not occur in the smaller watersheds, meaning that summer months are dry. So I will jump in and talk about some surface water projects, and hopefully those concepts from those hydrologic concepts will carry through. Looking ahead, the next two sections will be groundwater and then groundwater projects, and I think that will be an appropriate time to look at wells and where they're located. Director Reynolds. So Deniston diversion and water treatment plant. On an annual basis, surface water diversion from Deniston is an important source. Almost 12% of supply from Deniston came from Deniston in 2021.
I will add, though, that 2021 was a dry year, but the prior year was a wet year, and so we actually got much higher than that. We actually got about 200 million gallons out of Deniston, but again, it's really dependent on the weather. So in dry years, this is what you get. And we can see even as we're looking at our urban water management plan, Deniston in out years, our ability to use Denison becomes less and less. Also, Deniston is, we have secondary rights on Deniston with primary rights going to Cabrillo Farms and the Brussels sprouts.
I mean, in the good years, the prior 2 or 3 after Denison was built, we were doing 35 to 40% of our supply from there. That's what you're saying. Yes. I mean, we need to advise that, yeah, in fact, that investment was well considered and has paid its way for a number of years in terms of reductions in costs to SFPUC. In the drought years, it becomes problematic, as is noted in this slide. Thank you.
Right, yes. In fiscal year 2020, Deniston was about 35%. Right. And in 2019, Deniston was about 27%. So it can save us in 2020, I estimate it saved us about $1 million in SFPUC water.
Okay. The next surface water project is the Deniston San Vicente surface water project. I think, Mary, you were going to invite Dave Dixon to talk about a bit about this.
I on?
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, well, this is the Denison San Vicente project, which the district has been working on since 1969. And we have Jim Teeter with us, who was one of initiated this project. I think exemplifies the kind of long-term commitment required to acquire and perfect water rights. After working on this for more than 50 years, the district is still working on perfecting our water rights in Deniston and San Vicente. That said, I think things are moving in a positive direction, as Mary pointed out. These local watersheds, or the Deniston watershed, has contributed significantly and continues to contribute to the district's overall water supply. And I think we can expect that to continue. What we have been working on what we've been working on all along is making these rights permanent and getting all of the appropriate permits for the diversions. Getting a permit from Fish and Wildlife for the diversion on Deniston and the related projects and diversions on San Vicente is the focus of our current efforts. It's clear that nothing's going to happen quickly with Fish and Wildlife. I don't think the fact that we don't have the diversion permit on Deniston is going to affect our ability to divert. It hasn't so far. But Mary and I have been working for the last couple of years. These timeframes are long. I've been working for the last couple of years on this issue of the permits we need from Fish and Wildlife, and also the agreements we need to come to with the Golden Gate National Recreation Area in order to make the needed improvements on San Vicente, where the district really hasn't diverted any water. We feel like we're making progress in those things. It's very slow because these agencies are, they work very slowly through things that, as demonstrated by the fact that it took more than 16 years for the Division of Water Rights to grant the district's petition for extension of time on our existing permits. We applied for that extension of time in 2004 and received it in early 2020. So nothing's going to happen quickly. That's good news and bad news for the district. The good news is the district can continue to divert to the maximum extent possible from Deniston while working on perfecting the rights on San Vicente. I think that our surface water rights on Deniston should be pretty well established, assuming that we can address the resource issues in this process with Fish and Wildlife. On San Vicente, it will be more challenging. I think the best news we've had, or I guess I would call it the best news we've had in the last couple of years, has been the work that AES has done on fish resources in both these streams. We think we have a good case to make with Fish and Wildlife that we don't need to take special measures in order to protect fish in Deniston or in San Vicente, which significantly changes the way we would design our diversions and run our operations. So we're just at the beginning of that discussion with Fish and Wildlife. One of the challenges with this project and with any of these other projects that the district has done or is contemplating is that because they take so long, we work with multiple generations of staff at these agencies. So now we're starting with a group of folks at Fish and Wildlife that don't really know anything about this project and don't have any background on our past dealings with Fish and Wildlife. So that's just one of the challenges. But I think I think it's going in a positive direction. I'm sure the board will want to hear more at some point when we could devote more time to this particular subject. With that, I'll leave it.
Thanks, Dave. Yes, this is it's a slow process. And I think the other point, Dave mentioned that we have gone, through multiple generations of staff at these agencies. And I do think just in general, as we look at these projects and, going back to, 52 years, you said, Dave, in terms of working on, how we can perfect the rights. That means also going through multiple generations of boards and supporting, having long-term support for moving these projects forward. So I think that's, that's important as it's making a decision to move and invest in a source is, it requires long-term commitment.
I think we've demonstrated that the present board, considers this a high priority project and has continued to invest over the past years in data collection, which is required to be able to exercise our rights in that region. So, we all believe this is an important long-term direction and continue to want to see how we can achieve that objective. Thank you.
Great. Before I go on to my next surface water project slide, which is Pillarcitos, I'm going to go back to this slide. We've got the watersheds shown on this slide, and after Pillarcitos, which is by far and away the largest, Deniston is the second largest watershed within the Coastside jurisdiction. The unique feature about Deniston is that the users are the number of other users are well defined. Pillarcitos has multiple users, not least of which it includes SFPUC and the Pillarcitos Lake up in the upper portions of the watershed. The users in Deniston include some complicated agencies, Golden Gate National Recreation Area, not the least of them, but it is the second largest watershed.
If I may, Mr. Chair, make a comment at this point.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, it looks like my history records show that Denison Creek watershed's about 2,636 acres, and San Vicente Creek is about 992 acres of area. So I just wanted to kind of give you those little numbers from 1956. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. I will move on to the next slide. And thank you, Dave Dixon, for your comments and explanation. Pillarcitos Canyon well field. It's important to recognize, as I'm sure you do, that the Pillarcitos Canyon wells are surface water diversion features. They're not true groundwater wells. It's an important source for Coastside, provided approximately diversion from surface water diversions using these upper Pillarcitos Canyon wells provided approximately 7% of total supply in 2021. An important note here is that the life expectancy for municipal wells installed in unconsolidated alluvium is about 30 to 40 years, assuming that the wells are maintained. And that's just a rule of thumb applied worldwide, or at least throughout the United States. The Cedaw Canyon wells were installed more than 40 years ago in the late 1970s and early 1980s.
I will say, I just want to make sure everyone knows we can divert between November 1st and March 31st. And so we will be turning on these wells on Monday, so which is early for us actually, because of we had such a that big storm last weekend. It gives us this opportunity to turn them on early. Generally, we turn them on a little bit later, but we're anxious to start using them. So,
Mr. Chair,
go ahead, John.
May I ask Mary, what's our actual acreage of ownership in that area there, just for the records here, because there's been some discussion about how much we own there, CCWD. Do we have an accurate count of acreage there?
Dave, do you know by chance? I can get that for you, but I don't have that at my fingertips.
Nor do I have it in my head.
Yeah, I think great grandpa thinks there's 100+ acres. I could be wrong, because there was an interest at one time to dam it up. Okay, that's fine. We'll get the numbers someday, because people ask me.
Yeah, we own a good chunk of land out there, out in the canyon. So,
Mary, I can look it up while you guys are discussing.
Okay.
Here's a figure showing the area of ownership and parcels owned in red. Okay. Okay, so next surface water project. Some discussion has been put forward about the quarry in Nuff Creek. We looked at the area of Nuff Creek. It's generally speaking quite small. I looked at the information about the Pillar Cedars quarry. I'm not going to read the bullet points that are there for you. They're on the screen. I think in summary, the key point is that storage of 80 acre feet of water will be insufficient or even negligible relative to Coastside's annual water budget. Quarry operators plan to divert storm flow to the mine pit when Nuff Creek, if and when Nuff Creek has sufficient high flow. Their plan is then that they will release that water from the mine pit over time to benefit riparian habitat. For the quarry operators, that water resource process makes sense. It seems likely to address multiple mine operation challenges. From a water supply perspective, this amount of storage is simply insufficient to warrant the cost to divert from Nuff Creek, even if that would even be possible. We don't know if Nuff Creek storm flows will even be sufficient to fill the mine pit every season. I think that there might be an assumption that that would be the case, but that's not. There has not been a study done to show that that will actually be part of the future restoration plan for the mine.
So Robert, would it be, would we typify that as quarry not enough?
Yes.
No, I wouldn't say that quite yet. I don't think we've explored the possibility of having a well field up there. Would that be correct?
Let's talk about a well field as a part of the groundwater. I can skip ahead if you'd like, because I have some discussion of that.
Yeah.
And as we go into geology and types of rock.
Yeah, I did read ahead what you'd emailed.
Okay, good. So from a surface water perspective only, remember we've got very flashy flow in streams. We've got a very small watershed and limited amount of catchment area. We'll get some high flows at maybe for 2, 3, 4 days each year. During those high flow episodes, it may be possible to divert water sufficient to fill the mine pit, the future mine pit that has not been dug yet. That mine pit will have about 80 acre feet of storage. 80 acre feet of storage is 26 million gallons. It's really nothing compared to the annual water budget for Coastside. We're looking at 600 to 700 million gallons.
Yeah, no, my concern was more wells. And then I did, like I said, I did look through your presentation. At some point, cost of piping it to a water treatment plant, be it Nunes or Denison, has become a big factor in the cost and viability of any alternative water source. We need to get it to a treatment plant. And this is why I have favored this one, in that it's right next to a raw water line. So yes, I understand that the mine pit limitations, but I would like to see test pumping up there. I believe there's an existing well up there, and 50, 100 gallons a minute, the math would work.
Yeah, I just a couple of things on that. They do have a well and that they're using for their restrooms, dust control. In terms of the studies we've seen, it says it's 35 gallons a minute. In talking to some folks, thinking that I'm hearing this probably less than that. And I'm going to jump in. I just want to make one point. I also had occasion to talk to Balanced Hydrologics about Bedrock Wells, and Bob's going to touch on this later in the presentation. But basically, it's there were a little hit or miss in the area as well, and they're throwing out, you could maybe get 20 gallons a minute, but it's that geology. But I'm skipping ahead. I'm taking away Bob's thunder here. But the other point I want to say, one of the things that I know, Chris, we talked about this last summer, and we at that point in time, Vulcan was deciding whether or not to exercise their option to continue operation, and so we started having conversations, and in the last 6+ months, Vulcan has decided to they will exercise their option. They are going ahead with potentially their expansion. There's been a number of filings on their reclamation program. The reclamation program is very much supported by a lot of the environmental agencies, because on RCD, because they're going to ultimately daylight Nuff Creek, and it's part of the their reclamation plan. So anyway, I just want to throw that out, that it is something where they're doubling up on their investment in the area.
Thanks. Thank you.
So from the surface water perspective, the quarry, Nuff Creek, we've got a very small amount of water and very limited storage. And then from the quarry operation perspective, there's no indication that their expansion plan is going to be abandoned, or that current quarry operations will be discontinued. In fact, we've got the indication of the opposite, that the quarry operations are moving full speed ahead, and all of their plans indicate another 60 to 100 years of mining operations using the water that they currently pump or divert. Okay, so next surface water project study, Frenchman's Creek, also not advanced at this time. It's much larger than Nuff Creek, almost the same size as Deniston watershed. Frenchman's is a relatively large watershed, the third largest. With that said, there are 13 active water right claims and permits on Frenchman's Creek. So we're looking at a heavily used watershed. Surface water diversion from Frenchman's Creek, if possible, would be limited to very short time periods, probably to times when there is or has recently been heavy rainfall. My roll-up summary, the district's path of pursuing Deniston, San Vicente looks to me as the best available alternative. Okay, and that concludes section 4. Moving on, I've got three slides on groundwater, and then go into groundwater projects. Should we stop for discussion here, or would you like me to continue on?
I have a comment.
Go ahead, Ken.
I think Dave Dixon's still in the with us, and we've been talking about this 50 to 60 year horizon of work in Deniston and San Vicente. And we've identified it as, you know, the top dog in surface water diversion. So are we talking about it being perfected by 20, or is it possible it might be 2040, or, you know, is there any way at all to put a handle on this so we can set reasonable expectations as we continue to invest? I personally have always advocated and will always advocate, as long as I'm involved in the board, to move on this project, because I think we've got good data, we've got good information, we know it's viable. We have an ability to pipe it pretty conveniently to the water treatment plant, which I think is viable, modern, and capable. But I think that at some point would be really helpful, even though none of us have a crystal ball, to set a little bit of a timeline, you know? What could we expect in years, or what could we expect in 5 years or 25 years? And I think the main reason for that is that, you know, we're learning that we have other pretty primary and significant investments in our current infrastructure, our current system. And we know that this will take some funds. So I just think from that kind of standpoint, I'd be interested in hearing, you know, back of the envelope, you know, I think it's 2046 or whatever it might be.
Ken, I think that's a good comment. And I think that another way of looking at it is, rather than an arbitrary timeline, but to actually look at how long the tasks that are required could take. And I already anticipate one of the problems is that some of the regulators involved have been unpredictable. And I think, yeah, I don't have much to add to that except something cynical.
I just thought it'd be interesting to hear how Jim Teeter would have answered that question in 1980. if I could comment in response, there are some things we can definitely put on a timeline. Our current water rights permit expires December 31st, 2026. So that's the time frame in which, that's the current time frame we're looking at. There's nothing to preclude our applying for another extension of time on the existing water rights permit. If that were granted, we'd presumably have another 10 years until, say, 2036. If that is not granted, if it's not granted, then we would lose the ability to perfect water rights on San Vicente, but they would presumably issue us a license for the diversion on Deniston in accordance with the criteria they use, which would mean we'd be licensed to divert the maximum amounts we've been able to divert from Deniston and beneficially reuse. And right now, those are pretty good numbers. I think they're pretty good numbers for us. And I expect that by 2026, if we get some good rainy years, those will be pretty good numbers. We've been able to run Deniston so that the criteria that they'll use in issuing the license would be the maximum monthly diversion we're able to achieve, and then the maximum annual diversion. So based on past numbers, we've been able to get up to almost our maximum 2 CFS on a monthly basis, and something on the order of 600, but we've gone over 600 million per year in a banner year for the annual diversion. So those numbers would be pretty good on Denison. So we do know some of the timeframes. We've got in terms of the water rights, which is its own process, not strictly tied to the other resource protection issues, a pretty good position, especially with respect to Deniston. It may take us a lot longer to resolve the resource issues. And in terms of some of the things we'd like to do within the national park, even though we've got pretty strong rights established by the Half Moon Bay Properties Agreements, it could take us a long time to work through issues with the National Park Service. I'll just give you an example. We own the property where the San Vicente diversion sits, but we only have an easement for the pipeline. The replacing the pipeline in the existing easement presents certain challenges based on the elevations and so forth. And so the preliminary design we have prepared and presented to the Park Service would realign the new San Vicente intake pipeline outside of our existing easement. And in asking the Park Service whether that can be done, they're still contemplating it, but the answer is it's very, very difficult and could take a long time. They say 3 to 5 years normally to get a new property right through their bureaucracy. If we can't get that, then we have that imposes certain constraints on the design. So, sorry for the long explanation, but it's clear that anything we do with the federal government takes a very long time. And that's what Post experienced just in the process of trying to hand over this Rancho Corral de Tierra property. It took him, 10 to 15 years of that process. So yeah, timeframes are difficult. The good news is that those long timeframes shouldn't affect our ability to continue to divert the maximum possible amount out of Deniston.
If I may, Mr. Chair, with Dave there quickly.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Thank you. I'm just curious on the future of agriculture. What if the property owner reduced acreage production in the future? Does that have an impact on CCWD? If he went to alternative crops or something? I'm just throwing out a hypothetical situation with the age factor for all of us baby boomers.
Well, I think that's a good question. And it gets at something that's really a really important aspect of this particular project for us. And that is that our interests in those watersheds are very closely tied to those of the agricultural user. Currently, Dave Lea, whose riparian water rights are superior to the district's. We have a very strong interest in, and basically the agricultural use is limited by agreement with the National Park Service and with Post to 250 acre feet a year. So we know that agricultural, we know that the agriculture there uses a maximum of something like 80 million gallons a year. So not a huge number compared to the 200 to 600 million gallons that the district would like to get and yield out of those watersheds. But certainly any reduction in agricultural use leaves water in the creeks that could be available for district diversion. And that's particularly true during the drier months when we often have to shut district operations down to accommodate agricultural use. So kind of on the flip side of that, though, if anything we do were to reduce the ability of the agricultural user to divert from, let's say, San Vicente. Let's say the San Vicente intake pipeline breaks and the district doesn't replace it. The reduced ability of the agricultural user to divert from San Vicente would result in increased diversions from Deniston, which would reduce the amount that the district can take. So the answer is yes. If reduced intensity of water use or reduced agricultural use of those lands now owned by Lea would leave water in the streams that could be available for diversion by the district.
Thank you.
Okay, I will go back to my screen share. This is where I really start to enjoy talking about geology and hydrology. On our rainfall slides, we talked about seasonality, droughts, orographic forcing, rainfall averages. Then we talked a little bit about watersheds and the sizes of the different watersheds, with Pillar Cedaws being our largest, and then Deniston followed closely by Frenchman's, and then on down. Then we talked in our surface water section, we talked about stream flow and flashiness, seasonal changes in flow, looking at rainfall runoff ratios. And now we start to talk about a whole nother dimension of water resources in coastal California. And that relates directly, the foundation of this next dimension is the geology. So to understand groundwater, we need to layer in the geology. This slide here lists the 4 water-bearing formations in the Coastside jurisdiction. They're generally listed here in order of permeability. So permeability means the ability of a rock or sand to transmit water. The alluvial gravels at the top including those along Pilarcitos Creek from Half Moon Bay up to Pilarcitos Canyon. Those are the most permeable. Marine terrace deposits and Purissimo sandstone are in the middle of the range, and granite is at the very low end of the range. The Deniston wells draw groundwater, which is the Deniston wells are our sole groundwater source. They're drawing groundwater from the marine terrace deposits. So I wanted to call out that the, let's see, can you see my cursor moving around here? This kind of salmon colored, red stippled rock type here. This is the Montara granite. So you can see this green line is the boundary of the upper Pilarcitos watershed. This down in the southern end, this is not the same rock type. It's not the red stipple. This is more of an orange color down here. And that's Purissimo sandstone. So those are our four primary water-bearing formations. With the marine terrace deposit, the second most permeable being this old one that we've currently got wells operating within. A little bit more about groundwater and geology is that with the way that hydrogeologists look at water in subsurface water is by demarcating groundwater basins. And this is an interesting little tidbit here. The Half Moon Bay Terrace groundwater basin is defined by DWR. It's actually a series of small coastal groundwater basins. And each of those coastal groundwater basins has its own unique attributes. And so as a kind of an administrative procedure, DWR just lumped them all together. They're all unique, and there is no hydraulic connection between groundwater down in the south, down toward Lobitos, and groundwater in the north. But that's the way that we've kind of lumped them together for purposes of discussion. The basins within this DWR defined area are generally small. Groundwater discharges to the ocean. A lot of the detail is lost in this categorization. A key one is the role of the alluvial gravels. And remember, that was our most permeable unit. Alluvial gravels within the larger stream corridors transmit groundwater from the mountains, where we're seeing most of our rainfall, and across the marine terrace formation. So it becomes an important conduit for groundwater flow from the upper reaches where we're seeing more rainfall to the coastal areas where we've got more people. So to understand how much water might be available from a groundwater basin, hydrogeologists put together what's called a water balance or budget for coastal California groundwater basins. The water input is rainfall. We don't have snow or other input factors. Our sole input is rainfall. The watershed area multiplied by the annual rainfall is what equals the annual amount of water input. And as a general rule of thumb, every basin is different, but as a general rule of thumb, we can start with an estimate that maybe 10% of the rainfall might be available for recharging groundwater. That means that 90% is unavailable. It's either being taken up by plants and trees. Evaporation is removing a fair amount. A lot of it is running off into the streams and then out into the ocean. So maybe 10% might infiltrate and then actually recharge groundwater. In Pilarcitos, this 10% actually adds up to a fairly large amount. Over 1,500 million gallons per year should be available for groundwater recharge. In the next largest watershed, the Deniston Creek watershed, 10% of the rainfall is less than 250 million gallons per year. Still significant from our perspective in terms of what may actually be available for use, but significantly less than what we've got in Pillarcitos. And as we go down, as the watershed sizes decrease, the amounts of water that is potentially recharging our aquifers reduces accordingly.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'm interested because I live on the Pillarcitos watershed creek. What about the field and the proximity to the creek? So that's a big concern for anyone that's lived along the creeks. And I'm just curious because there's some pretty good wells along the creek, but I think the setback is getting more and more. But I think that's very important, other than the rainfall, is the flow of the Pillarcitos Creek near the well fields. That's just my two-bit opinion.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there are different factors there. And I think that my rule of thumb is generally taking into account those factors because it's such a broad, just 10%. It's a very small portion of the total amount of water coming into the watershed that we're assuming is being is potentially recharging. So the 90% that does not likely recharge the groundwater basin includes water that is diverted for beneficial use at other locations. So any surface water diversions, and just as with our upper Pillarcitos, our Pillarcitos Canyon wells, those wells are diverting surface water. Any other users that are diverting surface water, they're taking a portion of that 90% that's not within the 10% that may be actually infiltrating and percolating into the water.
Thank you.
Okay.
So let's talk a little bit about the groundwater projects and studies. Two of them are going to be recommended to be advanced forward, and the third is not recommended at this time. The first is Denison Wellfield. I won't read the bullet points, but I think those are important. The Deniston Wellfield is used to extend the annual operational period for the Deniston water treatment plant. Groundwater, this groundwater basin is a shared resource with the airport and Montara Water District. Studies have found that this basin is being sustainably managed, and also that there is likely seasonal storage that may not be fully utilized. The mapped extent of alluvium is very limited in this basin. So remember, that's our most permeable unit. You can see it just a sliver right here where my cursor is of alluvium. It's limited, but uniquely, the alluvial fan deposits overlie the marine terrace formation in this area. So the marine terrace oops, go back. I'm trying to go back. There we go. Sorry about that. There we are. So the alluvial fan deposits that I'm circling here with my cursor, those overlie the marine terrace deposit. Marine terrace deposits are here, the kind of dotted orange. And that's a unique feature for the Deniston groundwater basin. I included an inset here. Coastside has wells located near Deniston Creek and also further north on the west side of Highway 1. So here's a picture of our well field. A number of the wells are located right near the creek. And then we've got another well, D9, over deeper into the groundwater basin.
I should know, what are the little black dots all over the topology map? I'm sorry.
They are actually observations of landslide evidence. So this is the geologic map. I think you're getting into the minutiae of here, which I absolutely love. These red areas here are older landslide deposits that come down into the Deniston Creek. So as kind of a conceptual model, we've got this really spectacular narrow valley heading. I think that heading up with our alluvial fan deposits here along the creek and then spilling out onto the marine terrace. We've got alluvial deposits here. And then on the slopes, we've got our landslide deposits that are in red. And the geologist noted all of the observations he or she made of evidence of historical landslide.
It looked like, according to the legend in our Denison quadrant there, it looked like all kinds of little undiscovered wells and things that had been started and abandoned. I thought somebody was out there drilling wells, without telling us, because there's an awful lot of them there. Thank you.
That's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. No, they're definitely.
Yeah, that's what we're using for little wells. So I'm just asking. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And no, they're not wells. They're observation points. And I think you're bringing up a really important point too, in terms of the overall study that I've done. We pulled together pieces of information from different researchers with different objectives. And obviously the objective of the geologist that was mapping the deposits here was not to understand water resources. It was really more focused on geotechnical issues and landslides, documenting that.
Thank you.
But as a hydrogeologist, we can't ignore this. This is very valuable information that's been put together by a qualified geologist. And we need to understand the geology in order to understand the availability of water. And these types of maps are very valuable, but excellent point. Thank you very much for calling that out. No, the black dots are not wells. They are observation points mapped by the engineering geologist.
I will add, we don't, at this point, we don't get a lot of water from Deniston wells. Last year we got 9 million gallons. It is something where if we could, expand the use. This definitely, it extends the operating period as the second bullet. We need about, 300 gallons a minute to be able to operate the Deniston water treatment plant. So this supplements our ability to, divert, it extends the period of time that we can run Deniston, but it's not a standalone source at this time.
Thank you. And one other quick note on Deniston. The wells were installed in the 1970s. as we talked about earlier, the life expectancy for a municipal well in this type of geology is anywhere from 30 to 40 years. The wells have all exceeded their life expectancy. So kudos to you for maintaining and keeping those wells operating for this long. It's impressive. A recommendation is to replace those wells. Okay, next is Lower Pillar Cedaw's groundwater study. This Todd Engineers in 2003 and was retained by the county to conduct a study. And this was the next step from Jim Teeter's alternatives analysis, where Lower Pillar Cedaw, so that's the area generally outlined in blue on the slide here. This study was for a municipal well field in Half Moon Bay near Highway 1, where it crosses Pillar Cedaw's Creek. This alternative was recommended in 2002, and also in 2003, Todd Engineers conducted a study for Coastside. The Todd study concluded that significant water supply is available from this resource. Water quality is potentially sufficient for use without treatment, so not just disinfection. The subsequent studies conducted all assumed that water treatment would be necessary, but that's a conservative assumption. A pilot well was recommended as the next step. This was never installed. And with a well not installed, a pumping test has not yet been performed.
I have a comment here, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, no, I eventually would like to have staff and legal counsel. I have an idea for a potential well field, but I'm not going to share it at this time. I don't think it's appropriate. But I think that there is a good possibility of some good solid groundwater. But when we go back to quality of the water, it's our history that there is in this lower basin quite a bit of manganese in the water. And that's our opinion. So I don't know if you've heard about that at all yet.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. That the water quality, manganese is typically coming from the Purissima formation. And so going back to geology, that was a less transmissive unit, meaning that the alluvial gravels are the primary target. And when we take a break, I will pull up another figure that shows the specific geology targeted by the Todd study and recommended for screening within the proposed pilot well. It would not be within the Purissima, which is known to have manganese challenges from groundwater quality. So I think that's a really good point, that we do typically find that the groundwater coming out of the marine terrace formation is high in manganese. The water from the Purissima formation immediately underlying that is certainly high in manganese. And the question is, is the resource large enough so that we can screen wells that are uniquely within gravels and not within the offending formations?
Thank you.
I've got another slide, and I'm happy to pull up additional figures too. Cross sections are really interesting in the 2003 Todd Engineers study. One of the key questions when we think about groundwater is, will this be a reliable source? And we talked a little bit about water quality, which is the other important question. And groundwater is typically going to be much more reliable than surface water. The rate of flow is significantly slower. And we've got a kind of a buffering effect that helps us to get through dry seasons and even through dry years. We expect some seasonality in the availability of water from the lower Pillar-Cedaw groundwater basin. But here's a hydrograph of the past 45 years from 1975 through 2020. And basically what we're seeing on this figure is that water levels in that lower Pillar-Cedaw groundwater basin fluctuate annually by about 10 feet. We can see back in mid-70s, we had a drought, is my guess. The water level dipped down almost 25 feet below our winter level highs. But for the period from roughly 1980 through 2020, we're seeing water levels in a very tight bracket between about 50 at this location, about 50 feet above sea level down to about 40 feet above sea level. In this location, here's ground surface on this line. So it kind of gives you a picture where ground surface at this well location, about 67 feet above sea level. Drill a hole, come down about 20 feet. There's groundwater in the winter, and summertime groundwater drops down to another 10 feet lower. And when there is an extreme drought, we can expect to see water levels drop even lower. But generally speaking, we've got a very long record here of consistent water levels. So I think as I get into the final slides, I can come back to some additional discussion of the 2003 groundwater study. Right now I'm going to proceed forward. We've got the third project / study, and this would be Bedrock Wells. So the previous two projects were both in unconsolidated geology, so sands or gravels, and that includes semi-consolidated, so loosely consolidated materials. This one is into consolidated, so we're looking at bedrock wells. If in the quarry area, that would mean into granites. The historical groundwater studies conducted for Coastside have not recommended drilling bedrock wells. And this is consistent with general knowledge in the groundwater supply field that typically if we're drilling a bedrock well, we're looking at one, it's an unpredictable and challenging effort to drill a new well. Sometimes you hit a fracture zone and you get the yield that you're looking for. Sometimes you drill a bedrock well and it's completely dry. It's an embarrassing event for a hydrogeologist, and it's happened to all of us when we find a location, we site a well, we obtain access, we construct a road, we build a drilling pad, we find ways to dispose of our drilling waste, our muds and our wells, our water. We drill to 300 feet and there's no water, and we drill to 600 feet and we have a completely dry hole. That's part of bedrock well drilling, is it is unpredictable. It's very challenging for a hydrogeologist to consistently find locations for bedrock wells that provide water. the batting average, so to speak, might be quite low. The other portion is that our anticipated yield from a bedrock well, and when I say yield, I mean sustainable yield from a bedrock well, is typically very low, in the tens of gallons per minute might be a reasonable hope for a bedrock well. And what this comes back to is a couple of features. And one, you need for the yield to be sustainable, we need to have sufficient flow to the well. And bedrock is, as we talked about in the earlier slides, is much less permeable than sands or gravels. So that's one feature. The other feature is infiltration and recharge. So when rainfall comes onto a area that's steep hill slopes, an area with low infiltration rates, the rainfall will run off and go into creeks and run off and not infiltrate. When you're drilling a bedrock well, we need to think about where the recharge area is for that well. Is it in the immediate area around that well? Is there maybe a pond nearby that is maybe it's an artificial pond, maybe it's a natural pond? Is that feature there providing a location for recharge and infiltration to occur? Or are we drilling a well on a ridgetop where we don't have infiltration and we don't have a likelihood for long-term sustainable yield from the well? So the quarry wells, I think we talked a little bit about this earlier. Now this is probably our best spot for further discussion of the quarry wells. The information that I've reviewed indicates that the wells that are currently providing sufficient water for quarry operations are pumping at 35 gallon per minute is the estimate. I think that's a high estimate. The availability of water is likely affected by the presence of small mine pits, small ponds that capture rainwater and infiltrate it. The likelihood of being able to use that water, due to the ongoing operation of the mine is very low. Once the mine is shut down in 60 to 100 years from now, would we be able to maintain a recharge scenario with the operating well? That's a question that seems pretty far off into the future. Mary, did you want to?
Excuse me, maybe I'm missing the boat here, but this is a long way of saying this doesn't look to be too good a path to follow going forward. I mean, is that what the net of all this is?
I don't recommend the bedrock well.
Yeah, okay, I mean, that's what I thought it was getting to. So in my view, I mean, it just doesn't seem like it's got a lot of potential payback for us and our strategic plan, but that's my opinion based on what I'm hearing. So
right.
Thanks, it gives me some good insight into bedrock that I didn't have before.
Right, it's high risk and low reward.
Yeah, in my discussion with Devin Chenzi probably 6-8 months ago, he was under the impression Vulcan was going to walk away from their rights. So it's sounding like they are now. You're saying they are coming back to mine again.
Yeah, they renewed their option, to go back to mining.
Yeah, that's new information. Thanks.
All right, let's keep going on.
So groundwater summary, groundwater is available. It's the apparent lowest cost per million gallon per year alternative. Some seasonality anticipated. However, potential optimization and resource management could reduce the effects of seasonal groundwater level declines on dry season production totals. The Todd 2003 study assumed groundwater would be treated at the Nunes water treatment plant. That's a good and conservative assumption. Groundwater quality in lower Pilarcitos has not been adequately characterized to date. And it could be that the water quality, i.e. manganese, is sufficient for blending and for use without treatment other than disinfection.
Is this a good time to have a discussion about the groundwater study or the proposed well that wasn't drilled? Do we have any historical record of why that wasn't pursued? What happened?
Mary, James, Teeter, Mr. Teeter, are you?
Yeah, probably Teeter's the best. Okay, go, Ken.
I can also address that because I was involved in that whole process. The local person at that time who was doing a lot of stream management and monitoring. And what went on during that process is every time the Ocean Colony would turn on their well pumps, this person would take measurements in the Pilarcitos watershed. And there was a lot of discussion at that time that the watershed in that area over by the sand plant, there was a lot of conjecture that used to actually be sort of a harbor, that there was kind of a basin in there that wasn't full of the arroyo willows. And, essentially fishing boats could come into the area. And, there was just a lot of talk about that. So what happened was it also turned out that some of the ownership of the parcels that were being utilized for the drilling came into question. And so what ended up happening is it got very political. And because of the political environment, it was just really determined that it would open up so many bags of worms that it probably wasn't worth pursuing. Although my reading of the Todd data was it would be a great place for a well. I think that if you think about recycled water and you think about the location of the sand plant and you think about, the idea of blending water, the opportunities there, in my opinion, are enormous. And so I think it's one of the best avenues to pursue. But that was sort of the historical perspective. That was during a time, you remember the El Granada pipeline was going to be too big, and we were going to build this big pipeline, the 20-incher that was going to go around by Main Street, and all these things were going to overbuild our water system and create a lot of growth and development. So that's the historical perspective. And Teeter, I'm sure, could laminate on that as well.
Thank you, Ken. That's very helpful. It seems like I would hypothesize that the political situation may have changed, and I know our drought instability. I see Chris saying no. Fair enough, Chris. I think my concern is as our drought gravity increases and the challenges currently facing us, it does beg the question that a pilot well could be, would give us information whether it was viable or not. And as I look at the rainfall from the second largest creek and look at the rainfall from the first largest creek, the potential for water between the two is an order of magnitude different. And it does make, from a dollars and cents point of view, it sure makes it hard walk away from that. Chris, go ahead and give us your thoughts.
Yeah, no. Early on, when I was elected to the board, about the time Ken is referring to, yeah, there was great discussion about the wells, but behind the Holiday Inn there, 200 gallons a minute. It was a number that was thrown around. I think the big question here that Bob didn't really have the answer is: can we introduce that into the system with a quick disinfection, or does it need to go to the plant? And that seems to be unanswered. And that's a big question, because getting a pipe. We're still working on I'm trying to get a pipeline under Pelositas Creek right now, I believe. Getting a pipeline up to the treatment plant. I mean, obviously it's doable, but timelines and expense would be great. So it'd be nice to have an answer to that question. And it seems like the lowest hanging fruit certainly is that lower Pelositas well field. And I can take a guess as to who you were referring to really put the kibosh on that, and it's just unfortunate. And I'll go, and Kathleen, you are on. The most recent SFPUC meeting I went to, and can't say it was super recent, we're 50 gallons per person per day is kind of the new number. And we're hitting it, it's achievable. But then I see the Berkeley contingent at the SFPUC meeting racing to the bottom, one-upping one another. Well, in my house, we're down to 26 gallons, per person per day. We're down to 24 per. So I think that mindset is still there to throw in roadblocks to developing any new water, because there's a very loud, powerful segment of out there that says we don't need new water. We can conserve our way down to that 15 to 25 gallons per person per day. So the roadblocks aren't going away.
One quick comment I would make, Chris, is that it's important to remember that the treatment plant, the Nunes treatment plant, is primarily there for biological pathogen removal. And groundwater typically requires a different type of treatment. And so I would be very cautious about assuming that water from groundwater wells would even work put into our existing treatment plant. It's not what it was built for. And groundwater treatment plants are typically much smaller. They're pressure systems, and they're typically located at the well site because it's it's more of a chemical treatment rather than a biological. You're not trying to get out the coliform and the E. coli. It does happen that you can drill a well that is under surface influence, and then it does need surface water treatment, but that's not typically how municipal groundwater wells are drilled or installed or operated. So I think that that's an important separation to have on that. And I do think that, yeah, I'll be quiet.
Yeah, no, I didn't know. Thank you for the clarification. I'm just, I would like to know an overall cost, really what it will take to get that water into our system, and what kind of associated infrastructure.
Yep. And really then what it comes down to is the quantity and the quality. And I think that Robert's 100% correct. You can have studies, and it's very prudent to have good geology to tell you that there's a high probability aquifer downstairs before you drill. That's really a prerequisite. It sounds like that's been done. Then it comes into exactly what he's outlined, which would be a pilot well, that then you're looking at your quantity and your quality. And California has 16,000 groundwater wells that currently pump into municipal water systems. And the vast majority of those receive chlorine from a chlorine dosing pump, and it's injected directly into the distribution system. In the Bay Area, that's common. It happens. It happens all up and down the Central Valley. The There can be taste differences that people like and don't like. Alameda County Water manages some taste issues on that because their groundwater well field is different. So those are part of the mix in the cost, but the real key piece is you'd want a pilot well to perfect that knowledge before you went forward. And so then comes the question, and let's just throw out some soft numbers. In the past year, of the wells we've drilled, the most expensive was up at Skyline and through Hard Rock. That was a $125,000 well. It yielded 60 gallons a minute, required no treatment. This would probably, it wouldn't be a Hard Rock well, so it should be cheaper. So let's say we're still in the 100 grand because it's a municipal job, but then we'd have quantity and quality data to work from. And so when I look at some of the costs of even our environmental impact studies run into that kind of numbers, it does beg the question of our further discussion about the idea of doing a test well so that we have exactly the data you're asking for. Because I think it's dead on that we would want to know what this is going to entail.
Thanks again for further clarification.
Anybody else got any comments on this topic? Ken, Chris, anybody else? All right, should we move on to the next piece?
And I just have one follow-up comment. Again,
please.
I think that we're looking long-term, and that's what we're talking about. The proximity and the capability of looking at there was an article in the newspaper, an opinion written that, everybody kind of fell out of the recycle water loop. There's just some really interesting opportunities there. We got a timeline on San Vicente and Deniston. We don't have a choice but to go forward as promptly as we can, because that's a very important source for us. But I think there's some great opportunities in this location on the west side of Highway 1 by the sand plant for water treatment, for, taking some groundwater and, looking for what is probably the biggest source of water we could look at, which is what's being dumped out 2 miles in the Pacific Ocean. So, same old drill. I'm a broken record.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, it's so appropriate that we're discussing this. I mean, it's just amazing with the proximity and the future of agriculture is getting very frightening, in my opinion, on the coast. If you look around, we have rocket farms and we have the golf course, the major users of CCWD water. The rest is pretty much just a little bit from wells. But when we're talking about a time frame and all that, I just happened to come across my history life book here. A paragraph here, there's no better time than the present to give thought to our basic resource, water. That's a heck of a thing from 1956. I think we're following it, you guys. It's amazing what we're dealing with in this water world and the growth of coming through the Bay Area and all these apartments and condos that are being built everywhere and housing the unhoused individuals. So I think there's probably no better time than now for us to kind of look at maybe a pilot well and maybe even a little pilot treatment plant too. And if we could move further, as Director Coverdell has just stated, get that treatment plant going a little better and then blending and maybe being able to use that for the future of our Coastside families. Thank you.
And I'd like to thank the participants who repeated that this is a strategic plan. We're not looking for a fix for tomorrow. We're trying to look into the future. And I think that is really important. And that if, let's say, there was a land acquisition issue for well drilling, then it may take years to resolve that. And so that is the whole point of having a strategic long-range review. We're not rushing to do anything this second. We're trying to figure out how 20 years from now, how will our water be sustainable? And I think that as many people would agree, we are perhaps looking at more uncertainty than I think the current board is really comfortable with, between drought and political reassignment of the state's water. And there is value that this board and this organization, Coastside County Water District, has been pretty proactive about trying to encourage and work on local sources to the maximum extent we can, which is why we've spent real time and energy into our northern source. And so I think that this looking further or advancing our study of the Polarcitos well field matches that mission statement of stability, reliability, and local source at a controlled cost. So thank you.
Okay, so one last slide on
here with her tail. Sorry. Come on, dog. Go drink your water.
One last slide from me on the groundwater alternative before I transition into the next category. I put on my screen a cross-section from the 2003 Todd Engineers study. I think Mr. Teeter did a wonderful job of really pushing his consultant to do good work on this particular study. And you know, I love this cross-section. It has so many different pieces to it. The sands and gravels, this is really what we're looking at. You know, we're targeting that unit. That unit, as you can see, it comes up. The scale, the vertical scale is exaggerated. It's obviously not that steep of a slope as you go up toward the mountain range. But the point here is that the sand and gravels can become more shallow as you head up the Highway 92 corridor, and as you get further up, those sand and gravels actually come into contact with the creek, and that becomes a point of recharge. So many miles downstream, we're seeing sands and gravels that have transmitted groundwater from upper reaches of the watershed down underneath the Half Moon Bay area. And what's really wonderful, I guess, is how we could see it from our perspective, in that we don't want to have a impact to a creek by pumping from sands and gravels, is that the overlying units, as upper 20 feet, are predominantly silts and clays. And what is also being shown here is the saltwater freshwater interface. Todd's got a little incline here that shows that curvature that we were talking about early in the discussion here, with the saltwater intruding further at depth than it does up in this more shallow zone here. So I think this is, you know, a couple of other features. Here's they've projected on the approximate location of Highway 1. This is the approximate location of the test wells just west of Highway 1. The Stone Pine Road Center would be over here, and then further up the Highway 92 corridor as you go.
If I may, Robert, just respond here with this slide.
Please.
Is that right, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, it's our experience that sand and gravel strata is about 19 to 24 feet. And then we'll lose a little bit of that, as you're saying here. And then again, probably at 45 to 50 to 60 feet. And then after 80, 90 feet, there's no more for us along the Pillar-Cedas watershed for our property.
Excuse me, it's hard, the scales on this are all, I didn't see this before. The vertical, the horizontal scale is a couple of miles. How many miles is this thing wide? Excuse me. Is this 3 miles of up to Stone Dam? Excuse me. I just, it's like there's no horizontal scale. And all these crosshatch things are wells we now have in place there, right? The vertical drilling.
Yeah, so these are test wells.
Test wells. Are those test wells or are they real? I'm sorry.
These are test wells here represented by this one point.
Okay.
We've got other wells.
That they drilled to do this analysis.
Yeah, so this is.
Okay, that's their wells. I'm just
shared resource with, these are other wells that are used by others in this, that are.
In the lower Pillar-Cedas basin. By Todd. Okay, I got it. Now, what was the net of all this in terms of what you've presented to us about, that is an option? It looks like a viable place to find water at some level. Is that correct?
Exactly. It's a viable place to find water. It's
okay. Just trying to understand.
It's a source that may not cause pumping may not adversely affect the Pillar-Cedas Creek.
Okay.
Pillar-Cedas Creek is shown here. Let's see.
I got it. Okay. I didn't quite understand the context.
So it's separated from these sand and gravels by this silt and clay unit. Mm-hmm.
There's some water to be had there if we can do some test. Yeah, it's worth doing something there to try and find out what the option, what we could get from it. Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Other local water projects and studies, recycled water.
Can I, Robert, I'm sorry, can I interrupt you for just one more second?
Yes, of course.
At the time of the Todd study, I want to make sure you understand that the other appeal to that study was there were 3 or 4 parcels in there that were available for purchase. So it was possible for us to actually buy the parcels where the test wells were going to be placed. And that also tends to be sometimes a little bit of a hitch, is can we get the property rights to, put a permanent well in? So it's, I don't know if those properties have sold or changed hands or whatever. That was 18 years ago, but it would be very interesting as we go forward to learn about that as well, because those properties are not really developable. So they have kind of limited value, but for us, they would have, a great value. And so it's kind of interesting that's just another little noisy bit of the past.
So next slide, recycled water. I've got some statistics here, bullet pointed out. It continues to be an interesting and evolving alternative. The Carollo study reported in 2002, almost 20 years ago, it found that water quality would be generally insufficient for agriculture. That was with the treatment at the time, essentially too high of TDS. So the target customers at that time for recycled water would be entities with lawns that require irrigation. Mr. Teeter in 2002 wrote that Skylawn nor Ocean Colony both had been presented copies of the Carollo study, but neither were interested in purchasing the recycled water at that time. Fast forward to today, the technology has improved. The state is working toward regulations for direct potable reuse of treated wastewater. Their deadline for that is the end of 2023, so December 31st, 2023. There will be regulations that describe how wastewater can be used and can be treated and then directly reused as a potable source. Also, the sewer agency, SAM, they may become more interested in water reclamation as discharge regulations become increasingly stringent. In summary, I think the recycled water technology is progressing. There are multiple external factors that influence the feasibility and timing of development of recycled water as a reliable local source. I think this could be a point of where there's more discussion. Mary, would you like to jump in here or like me to continue on, or should we open it up for comments?
I will say recycled water has been a, continued interest here on the Coastside. You'll see newspaper articles regularly, including yesterday. And so it is, it does, I think now offer a lot of possibilities as we move forward in even in conjunction of thinking about the Todd study and groundwater and, there are possibilities even that could mean in the future, indirect or direct potable reuse. I mean, talking many years, a long term, but it is it's important to our community for us to be considering recycled water. So
I think the only thing I can add to this is that my review of Purple Pipe has shown that its time has come and gone, that it's not viable to put in a Purple Pipe infrastructure and then sell the water at a lower price than the potable water. You've got a very high infrastructure cost and a low sale cost. It doesn't pencil out. And I don't know of very many communities that are finding that anything different from that. So I think my theory on this would be that if we're going to see recycled water, it's going to be treated wastewater that what goes up to the intake of our existing potable water treatment plant, and it gets blended with Crystal Springs water and or well water going into the water treatment plant as a blend. And that has the cost of the pipeline running from the wastewater plant up to Nunez, and that's a significant cost, which there's no two ways about it. It's expensive. However, that pencils out better than trying to find a few customers who will pay for purple water.
Point.
Glenn, thank you so much for introducing that. That's what I've always, if one were a city planner, we're designing a new city like a Dublin, I was out there the other day, you could see the Purple Pipe when you're starting with open fields, it pencils. After the fact, Purple Pipe is a non-starter, and then, back to the envelope, I saw that immediately. So thank you for confirming that by fact. So we kind of need to rethink that. If it's as simple as just getting it up to Nunez, that's great. The blending probably will meet some community opposition, but I think that's how we should be looking at recycled. And we were talking about timelines earlier. Yeah, here's a timeline I would like to see clarified. When are they going to resolve the law? The three agencies that control the sewer plant, when are they going to resolve the lawsuit? It's going to be really, really difficult to work with an agency that is involved in ongoing litigation, and I don't know when that will ever end. Thanks.
Chris, Chris, I think that's a really valid point, and I think that's got to be right up front on the table, that the current wastewater plant operation is really challenged by the organizational structure, or how it's the litigations and the challenges, and that is front and center in that issue. Would have to be addressing that, would have to be part of the solution.
Absolutely, thank you.
Is okay, Glenn? It's very hard to articulate clearly and succinctly the way philosophically this has developed over the last 15 years that I've been involved with it. And I think Ken's points and Chris's points and Glenn's point are all valid. I am prepared, I mean, most of us on the board, to try to integrate recycled water in some way into our environment for the long-term needs and the potential long-term drought situation, and willing to talk to whomever who's willing to talk to us going forward to try and make this happen. Up to this point, we have not been very successful. However, we have made the effort, and I'm prepared to make more effort. But I think things are on the table now and make it difficult to do that. Although I see it as a very strong long-term way of dealing with the issues that face us. All that being said, we have 5 other proposed alternatives that have been presented, which we'll see at the end, which can be looked at as shorter term, potentially, and more reasonably things that we can control to get started doing some things to make a dent on the potential shortfall going forward. So in that regard, I would, at some point when we get to the summary, want to see how those look as possibilities where we invest resource and time to try and get some bang for the buck, as it were. So that's all that I can really offer at this point, because I don't have any way to solve this problem beyond what we have all invested in terms of time, labor, and energy to try and do it up to this point. So that's my view. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, please, John, go ahead.
Yeah, just briefly again, I've lived it. I was on the SAM board, and I can tell you I've had the privilege to be meetings all over the world. And that is one of the most challenging meetings I've ever attended in my life. And you could ask the board members who are sitting here and Mr. Dixon also what we've lived through with that. And so let's just hope there'll be some resolve in the future. Boy, as my 1956 study has said, it's time now, folks, to get this together. Thank you.
Bob, do you have any? Yeah. So have we heard from each of the directors? Have they each put their kind of comments and thoughts on the table? Does anybody want to make a wrap-up comment?
I could, Mr. Chair. I've had this on for many years, and it's called the board has to be smart. Okay, S for strategic, M for measurable, A for availability, and R for reluctant, and T for timely. And that's been on my desk for about 40 years. Don't ask me how I ran the business, but it sounds good to be smart on this board. Thank you.
So I'd like to make the comment that Mary and actually everybody on the staff and the consultants and the team that have worked to put this presentation, in my years of being on the board, I think this has been one of the most helpful presentations that I've participated in talking about summarizing what we've looked at in the past and some of the challenges. And I think that history and not reinventing the wheel is incredibly valuable. I think what Robert's put together has been very valuable. The board has been really clear that we want to be moving forward and strategically in a long range sense, looking at what options would be available in the future, and is there groundwork that should be being laid now to make that happen. And some of the notes that I look at now, I think that, and I'm just reflecting, and not in any particular order, but I think Dave's point that the San Vicente rulings or rights have an expiration, and there's value to perfecting those if it's viable. I think that Ken's comment on the groundwater test well on Pilarcitos is an incredibly valuable one that I think this board would be wise to readdress and re-look at and see if there's anything we can refresh on that. I think that if the politics are such we couldn't develop it, so be it. But if it's simply a matter of land acquisition and then getting groundwater quantity and quality data in front of us, and those are doable and viable options, I think that would be very wise. I think continuing to reassess and stay fresh on what's viable. I think the part that surprised me is I feel that I feel less certain about our San Francisco supply than I did 10 years ago. I feel there's been more movement there. This recent potential float that we would see a 50% cut in San Francisco delivery was really sobering to us. And I think that means that some of these restrictions or barriers or options change and evolve as California moves forward. And so I think there is real value to continuing to touch this and make sure that we as the board are acting in a wise and smart way. It's my belief that the board should reflect on what we've learned today and come back. I'd like to see us in either a week or so, 10 days, and have just a general comment on where the board members, how they've digested this and what they'd like to see move forward as an action or directive to staff for the next step. And go ahead.
I have a question. It seems to me that we're not quite finished. We've got about 30 minutes, and I assumed that Bob was going to present the punchline. That is the bottom line at the end of this thing. And so that would be good. It sounds like we're at closure here. I don't think so. I wanted to hear the rest of it, and then there's a last page with the recommendations that we can comment on and give some direction to board staff as to whether some of those things could be attended to or begun to be thought about in more detail. Is that correct, Mary? And Robert, I'm just checking.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm very excited, very excited about the process. Yeah, no, I just couldn't keep it in anymore, Bob.
No, it's okay. I got it. It's an emotional thing and a thing we want to talk about. We get to the punchline, maybe we can make some, interim decisions about things that we think we should be doing here pretty quick. No. I'd like to do it today, as much as 10 days. I'd like to get it on the table today. That's all.
And I thought I was jumping the gun, and I thought I was going ahead.
No, I'm ready to rumble here, man.
All right, Bob, let's hear it. Do we have a closing page?
Thank you.
All right, here we go.
I've got several slides, 4 slides on contractual water, and this essentially speaks to the agreement with SFPUC.
Yeah, I think we could probably skip through this. The one thing I just will say with this is that we do have a perpetual commitment from San Francisco. And so this is, it's very valuable to us. And we've been a major investor in the San Francisco water system. In normal times, our individual supply guarantee covers us and more than enough. we have a 2.175 million gallons per day supply guarantee. But again, in the drought situation, and even, we're being cut. So, that's which President Reynolds, talked about. So, and we discussed in our last board meeting. But if we go on, I think the one point with San Francisco and looking with contractual water, there could be opportunities with discussions in the future with San Francisco. San Francisco is looking at, for example, potentially bringing in the Santa Clara Valley Water District purified water, blending it at Crystal Springs, perhaps. And so are there opportunities for us to get any additional, supply guarantees? I don't know. It's something we could address as well. And also in terms of if there's any other BOSCA members who might give, help with a drought allocation release, probably not, but not, it's something we just have to, we need to think about. And Chris, I don't know if you have any thoughts on any of those.
Yeah, I see wheeling as an option. And Glenn, maybe you can answer this. We had preliminary discussions of wheeling water in through the Hayward system. It was all go. We'd spent all kinds of money on looking at the feasibility. Last minute, Hayward nixed it because they felt that it would put stress on their system, water running the opposite way from which it was designed. Glenn, our valve's directional. I don't,
So, and I can actually answer that. I'll try really hard to be politically correct because I've done a lot of work for the city of Hayward, so I don't want to throw them under the bus. The water can flow through the pipes in either direction with no malfeasance or issue to the piping and the valving and that. There are two factors that come in. One is taste and flavor, which can change as you move different water qualities. And man, I'll tell you, customers just are very sensitive to that. So that's one. And the second is Hayward does not have a new or even midlife cycle. I would characterize much of the Hayward City municipal water as mature to senior. And they struggle with that financially. And so I think that that does play a factor for them. They run a fairly lean operation. They don't have a lot of extra staff. And remember, they're run by the city, so they're not a special district. So their sole mission statement is to keep the mayor happy, and the mayor wants to spend as little money as possible on the water system.
And coincidentally, he was the BOSCA representative at the time.
What can I say?
Yeah, so because they are on the outer, the reason I bring this up is relative to wheeling, because they're on the outer reaches of the BOSCA service area. Any water wheeled in would come through their system. So short version is it kind of rules out wheeling. I will share with the board the most recent correspondence from Nicole. State board has agreed to a voluntary agreement, I believe, for the Sacramento region, our watershed. They have rejected our voluntary agreement for the Tuolumne watershed and other, between the lines, come back to us with new numbers. So the voluntary agreement isn't good enough for the state board. They want to see new numbers. So it's still not looking good, hence the urgency today. We really need to look for local sources, because there was a time when we hooked up to the regional system. We thought, this is great. This will be our insurance policy. This will give us reliability. And that is now waning. So all the more urgency today. Thank you.
Want to move on?
Well,
I'm going to skim over this one fairly quickly. The desalination salination. It's been included as an alternative. Over the decades, it's never been recommended and carried forward. Just generally speaking, it's a very expensive alternative. Recommendations. Next 3 slides are my final slides. If you can read this, hopefully you can. The highest ranked alternative is the lower Pilocitos well field. And what I did was I split the alternatives into 2 groupings. One, a set of projects that produce 100 million gallons per year or more, and a second that is smaller projects producing 50 million gallons per year and more. Both of those groupings needed to be, in order to be considered, needed to be implementable within 50 years. So longer range concepts were not included in this grouping. 50 years was the implementation timeframe. I've got 3 categories in the ranking, one being unreliable, and the equivalent for water quality would be poor, or one would also be assigned in the cost category for high cost. And then 2 is moderate, and 3 is good. More points is a better alternative. And so our scoring came up with the top 3 all coming out with the same score of 8s, and the lower 3 all coming up with the same score of 6s. And, there's a lot of thought and effort that went into this system to go through these. The lower Pilocitos well field is ranked at the top, and in some of the previous iterations had the highest score, continues to be the recommendation as the most implementable and largest potential source, looking at 259 million gallons per year in a normal rainfall year. Good drought reliability, very good. The water quality ranking, it got a 2, and that could be increased after a pilot test is performed and we've got more data. But without the data, the water quality ranking was a little bit lower, so it came in with a 2. Conceptual costs, this is, if you look at the second to last column, I've got the cost in thousands of dollars per million gallons per year. So kind of an interesting metric, but that's the way we can compare these 6 different alternatives. And our lowest cost per million gallons per year is the Pilocitos well field, is local groundwater. And that's no surprise. That's generally what we see everywhere throughout the state is local groundwater is available, and if it's available without adverse impacts to the environment, to other users, and if the water quality is sufficient, it's by far and away the lowest cost alternative. Our second lowest cost is recycled water. Again, this is intended as strategic. I'm taking numbers here that were from older studies. So we've got the 2002 Carollo study that estimated $10.84 million for construction of a facility. There were a lot of assumptions that would no longer be consistent with what we've got today. That study assumed that the customers would be Skylon, it would be purple pipe type water, it would not be a direct potable reuse, it would not be a more distributed local purple pipe system. But they did come up with some numbers for us to look at, and recycled water gave us a 365 million gallons per year. Very good drought reliability ranking. The water quality ranking on recycled water assumes that the technology is working very well. And so we put in with a 3 in the water quality. It's a little bit of a fuzzy use of the numbers there. It is a little bit higher cost than groundwater, and so the relative construction cost ranking is a little bit lower. In that, the final item in that top category is the Deniston San Vicente surface water diversion and pipeline. And the really big factor on this alternative is that it's so large of a potential source, and it's all local. It's 472 million gallons per year in some of the workups. The drought reliability ranking is a little bit lower because it is surface water, but the water quality ranking, it's known. We use that water right now, and it works quite well. The conceptual cost ranking is it is higher than the local groundwater or than recycled water even. However, we're looking at a large quantity of water, and the total score on that diversion came out as an 8. The next grouping.
Hey, Robert, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but where in the world did you come up with $20 million for Denison and San Vicente? I mean, really, that's not even in the ballpark of any discussion I've ever heard.
And
it's four times the estimates that I've heard.
Right. That's an excellent point of discussion there. I think that that is one of the numbers that came in. I don't recall exactly where that was brought in from. It's not my number. It's a number that was put together either through discussions or in reports. I think it was probably from a discussion, but Dave, you would be the person to help better bracket that number.
Yeah, maybe
is that the number you remember?
Yeah, I think all of these numbers were, we questioned this when we, internally, and, Bob had taken these just from studies from the past 20 to 30 years. So I think you have to kind of look at that with a grain of salt. We just left them on with these ones that these were experts, but I think just in general, these are, this is how I came up with the ranking.
I had a question for Bob or whoever. I had a senior moment because I didn't realize you computed it per million gallons per day on the next column over. I did it all myself, and your numbers were right because I computed them all too. There's 2 50-year windows here. Whatever. We're talking strategic plan and 50 years out. Okay, so that's number 1. And then we have 2 groupings, one of the ones that scored 6 and one of the ones that scored 8. Okay. And then there's nothing that parameter that calls reality check, which is what's the reality of any of these things being achieved in the less than 50-year time frame, like the next 5 or 8 years, because some of this stuff's got to be done sooner than 50 years from now, unless I'm missing something. I like strategy for 50 years, but it's the 5 or 8 year plan. That's the only thing you can put your money on. My question is, if you rank these in per cost per million gallons per day, the number 1, 11.12K per million gallons is number 1 on the list with a ranking of 8, which might be something we could actually do in the next 5 or 8 years. And so that's one I would pick as being something we definitely got to look at intently. Okay. Number 2, the next one in ranking for per cost that we might even get to is the 38K down in Deniston well replacement. We might even be able to do that in sometime less than 50 years. So I would think that would be something to look at. Recycled water, 30K per, yeah, it's great, but we won't achieve that in the next 5 or 8 years if I did all my wishes and everything. Number 4 in line would then be Denison, but that's going to take a few years. Even as we've talked about it, it could be 5, 8, 16 more years because we don't know about all these permits and all this stuff. So the one after that would be Pilocitos Canyon well replacements. Might be something to look into, even though it's going to cost a little more per unit, but it really does potentially something we could get done in the next 5 or 8 years. So that would be one I would like to look at even much more. And drill new wells in Deniston Airport, 116K per million, not worth it. Not worth it. So those are my thoughts. There are about 3 things that I could put my fingers on. Lower Pilocitos, Pilocitos Canyon well replacements, and Deniston well replacements. Stuff like that. I don't know. We control that. We can do that. We can actually potentially make something happen. So that's why I would go in that kind of, those are my thoughts, my opinions. And my
Bob, you're absolutely right. As far as us having control and looking at this purely from a timeline perspective, couldn't agree more. Well replacements and well replacements. We can control those. Those could be done those could be done during our terms while we're still sitting on the board. The other is certainly Lower Pilocitos right behind them. The other options here are for future boards. We can certainly get the ball rolling. I would like to see results sooner than later. Well replacements we could see during our terms. And thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and as I said earlier, what I'd like to do here in the near future, I'll be very careful of my comments here, is give staff some of my opinions on possible locations, and then staff can handle that before they ever bring it toward to the board. So I want to offer that here in the next few days.
Well, maybe we should buy a well drilling machine. We could take our robotic mower out and mow a pad and we
drill a hole.
Just start drilling right away. And it'd be a useful piece of equipment given our enthusiasm for it. When I look at the numbers, I think that's very incredible and interesting. And I totally doubt them. The SAM group said we could build a recycle plant over there for, I think it was 2 or 3 million.
Yeah, with buckets.
Yeah, they were going to put it in a tent. And so I just think that when you're looking at things like that, it's not to get carried away with it, but to continue the conversation. I'll throw a really crazy idea out to you. There is a local water district who's supposedly producing more water than they can use. We've always talked about them maybe having some financial issues. Maybe we ought to see if we can buy some water from a local water agency and get an emergency tie at the same time. And maybe their water rates would compare to the water rates we're going to be paying SFPUC going forward. And maybe it could help to offset some of the draconian cutbacks that we could face if the drought continues. Just to throw that out there.
Mm-hmm. I'm for that.
So, okay, I think conclusions. One of my conclusions. It's not written down here, but you can read the 3 bullet points. The historical analyses, alternatives analyses, were very comprehensive, and they started at a very high level and then ratcheted down to the project and very specific on the ground level. They did not overlook any potentially feasible alternatives that need to be considered at this time. Those past studies pointed us in the right direction, and we're right there at a point where we've got a lot of information available to us. The recommendations on this second to last slide, continue acquisition of rights to water in San Vicente and Denison. It's a very large ongoing project with a lot of water available. It's local water under local control. Consider implementing the next step recommendations in that 2003 Lower Pilocitos groundwater study. That is, getting that information from a pilot well is critical and give us a great idea as to what can and cannot be done. Replacement of the surface water wells in the upper Pilocitos Canyon. a very implementable compared to some of the other alternatives. It's very low cost and direct route forward. Similarly, replacement of wells in Denison, same idea. In Deniston, a little bit longer term, but there's, and it really could be broken, this fourth bullet point could be broken into two parts. It could be an evaluation to see if you want to expand that well field. That would be a separate opportunity there, increase the use of groundwater in that area. And finally, continue the engagement with stakeholders, multiple stakeholders, and develop a potentially feasible recycled water alternatives. Those are recommendations. And with that,
Hey, great minds speak alike, Bob. 2, 3, and 4, right up, right on. See that? You were ahead of me all the time, and I just didn't realize it. But no, 2, 3, and 4, that's the nickel that might get us going somehow. So good for you. I love it. There you go, Mary. You got some things to consider and move forward on, I think, anyway. I don't know what the rest of the board thinks, but this is cool. Hey, way to go.
That's an engineer talking.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, Chris, anything to comment on?
No, I've pretty much said what I feel prior, and I certainly would once again agree with Bob's direction in prioritizing 2, 3, and 4. I think those certainly I want things done in the real near term. Certainly, we can't take our eye off of the 50-year outlook. I'm not saying we should do that, but I really want to deliver alternative sources of water to our customers post haste. I mean, this is what we're charged to do. These, droughts aren't going to go away. The situation, with SFPUC and the Tuolumne River people, it's not going to get better. We need to look locally, and we need to put water into our system as soon as possible. And I think there are some really low-hanging fruit where we could get immediate results and continue to pursue the long-term options also.
Ken, any comments?
I would just say great job. I think it's wonderful to get to the summary, and I thought it was really great how Bob was able to summarize it before we got to the summary. Good job, Bob. And I think that this has been an extremely reasonable investment. We've got studies for years laying around on the shelf. And so I really appreciate Robert's effort to put all these into a package, put it into an explainable condition, and summarize it in a way that makes a lot of sense. And I think the low-hanging fruit is one of the favorite topics, and that's great. I go for it. Good job, Robert. That was money well invested.
Good job, Robert.
Thank you.
And I'd actually like to take a moment here to thank the board for pushing this forward as a long-range strategic plan. And I think that's only happening because this board is committed to what is in the best interest of Coastside County Water District and our community, and looking into the future and making that investment. And I think that this workshop was very well done, and I think it was very valuable. But I think that it cannot be forgotten that the only reason this happened is because the board has kept its eye on this topic for years and kept the ball moving. So staff, thank you for listening to us, and consultants, thank you for the work that you're doing. I thought this was very educational and very helpful, and gave the board great information on a way to pursue forward.
Well, Mary, I assume that at the next board meeting, staff will do a report to summarize in some fashion this meeting and the sort of the board's instruction to you as a result.
I could do something.
Is that correct? Huh?
Yes, I could do something.
Okay, thank you. It would be good to have a refresh in the board meeting so that the public sees this as part of the board minutes for that meeting. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Good work.
I want to thank Bob. We've been having discussions since the spring, so I think this came together, and so thank you so much, Bob. And I really appreciate having Dave on the line as well, and Jim Teeter. We didn't hear from you, but
Yeah.
but we appreciate you being involved, and we've actually had a good meeting in the summer, brainstorming meeting with, so.
Thanks.
Anyway, Dave, do you have anything you want to add, or? Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Well done, and thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Thank you.
Take care. Stay safe.
Okay. Thank
Do
you.
we have to adjourn the meeting or something?